Yes, it is. Hello, everyone who's joining. Welcome. We're going to wait just a couple minutes here to allow others to join, and then we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. We will get started in just 1 minute. Welcome to everybody.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And Eliza, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are super excited to be covering this topic with you.
Yes, I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to How to B Corp with Eliza Erskine. To introduce Eliza, after completing a master's degree in sustainability management from the Harvard Extension School and a bachelor's in business administration from Boston University, Eliza launched Green Buoy Consulting. You can find her website at greenbuoy, B-U-O-Y, consulting.com. I recommend checking it out. In 2018, to show businesses exactly how to integrate sustainability to transform their businesses. Her work focuses on early stage and small companies all across industries and delivers results including 30% average annual energy savings and adding an average of 38 points to clients' B Corp assessments. A researcher and lifelong learner at heart, Eliza draws on her education and previous experience in financial services, ESG research, and relationship management to support clients. A Pacific Northwest native, she now lives and works in New York City. So welcome, Eliza. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome to everybody else as well. And we are super excited to go through the B Corp process with you and hear about the benefits and how it benefits startups. So I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation here.
Great, thank you.
And for all participants, please feel free to submit questions at any time via the chat. Let's see. Great. Okay.
Okay, great. And yeah, feel free to share in the chat where you're calling in from, your name and company if you feel like it.
Awesome.
I think on the bottom right, if you go to present, yeah, that little thing that looks like a, yeah, over.
Keep going to the
one
right.
more. Yep, that one.
Great. Awesome.
Okay, great. So we've already gone through that. So we can do the next slide, please. We did my intro. Okay, so thanks again so much to 500 Startups for having me. I'm just gonna walk through the B Corp process, especially what it's like for startups, the pros and cons. We're gonna talk about industries that it's suited for, and also how to use the impact assessment, even if you're not getting certified, and just give kind of an overview of how B Corp can benefit your business. So next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so B Corp Certification is a certification that's given by a group called B Lab. I have to say that I'm not affiliated with B Lab. That's just my little thing to say. And B Corp Certification means that you have passed B Lab's criteria and are approved as a company that incorporates people, planet, and profit into your business structure. So B Corp companies have to fill out an online assessment, you change your legal standing to a benefit corporation, and you also pay a fee to get certified. So I think a good way to help explain the certification is to look at companies that have the certification. So Allbirds, Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, These are all companies that are certified to the B Corp standard. Certification is open to any type of business as long as you are a for-profit business, but it's open to service-based companies, product-based companies. So the certification looks at the strength of your business in these 5 main areas: workers, governance, customers, environment, and community. It's really a holistic look at your business focused on these areas. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so why do companies get certified? So companies really look at B Corp as a certification of their values and the actions that they're taking to support the planet. So especially for companies that are growing, like startups that don't have maybe a sustainability team, but are taking action or have created a business that's focused on sustainability, the certification process is a great way to cement those practices and prove that you're taking action. So there are a lot of statistics and more each month about how B Corps grow faster. They have better customer retention. They performed better during the pandemic. So these are just some quotes from companies that I think really speak to the other benefits that they've experienced. Tiffany from TMI Consulting talks about how she doesn't have to search for staff. Her B Corp status means that people come to her and want to work for her. And then Tom from a life insurance company, he's talking about how B Corp helps him with partnerships. So if you're in a space of, hiring, looking to do business with like-minded people, B Corp is definitely a good indicator of that. So I know that 500 Startups data also has found that companies want to apply ESG for hiring purposes, and that's definitely true for B Corps. And I think as ESG becomes in the forefront of a lot of people's minds, people are thinking about hiring. Now there are B Work job boards. A lot of people want to be working at companies that have a certain mission. So B Corp is just a way to kind of cement that in practice. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go through the certification process. So to get certified, you have to, it's a 3-part process basically. So you complete the assessment online that's offered on B Lab's website. You verify through B Lab, you meet with them, they go through your assessment, and then you have to do the legal requirement and fee change. So during the verification process, B Lab does a background check. They have some follow-up questions and additional information. And then suppliers, you have a check about suppliers. And then the legal requirement is the last kind of main thing that you have to do. The legal requirement is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's required. You do have to legally change your structure from an LLC, S Corp to a B benefit corporation. So that's a non-negotiable. So if that is something that you're thinking about, just kind of keep in mind. And then the fees that you have to pay are based on your annual revenue. So especially for a startup that has less annual revenue, your fee is going to be lower. Next slide, please.
And it looks like we might have a question here, Eliza. So I just
want
to pull that up. Yes, this will be recorded and shared afterwards on our social media.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about completing the assessment. This is what takes the most time and where companies, I think, get a little bit tripped up. So the assessment, if you go on B Lab's website and click certification, you'll see what's called the BIA, the B Impact Assessment. It's an online platform and it shows you different questions and you answer them and provide documentation for your business. So these are some examples of questions talking about energy use, renewable energy use. Points are weighted differently based on your industry and the type of business that you have. So when you're setting up the assessment, it will ask you for if you're a service-based business, product-based business, and then depending on what answer you provide, you'll get higher points based on different things. So for example, if you have 100% renewable energy usage, that will be worth more points. So there's also a portion of the assessment that looks at kind of the impact of your business model. So if you have a business that's set up for a specific environmental or social benefit for your customer, the assessment will take that into account. So when you're completing the assessment, it's really important to document and provide proof of what you're talking about. So if they're asking you about total energy use, you have to show an energy bill and prove that what you're doing. So as you're going through, it's important to have that in your mind that you're going to have to prove this and you'll have to show documentation. So to become certified, you do need a minimum of 80 points. And as you're going through, you'll be able to see how much each question is worth. I recommend that people apply at least 85 points, if not more, just because when you're meeting with B Lab, there's certain things that you'll drop points on. So it's just good to have that kind of buffer point process.
And I do want to mention that anybody can go on B Lab's website and look at the assessment. I think it's really useful to look at. As Eliza mentioned, there's 5 areas and then pretty long lists of metrics. You can get a really good sense of their framework. So even if you're not planning on applying for B Corp status right now, it's great to go on there and look at the framework that they have. You could just scroll through it and you can see the whole thing without even starting to go through it. And Eliza, how long does it usually take, or what's kind of a ballpark for time that you'll spend completing the assessment?
It really depends on the company, but I would allocate anywhere from, for a first pass, it usually takes about 3 to 4 hours. But because, it's free to start, it's free to go on there, I recommend that companies kind of take each one area at a time. So if you spend like an hour doing environment, and then you can spend an hour doing employees to get kind of a good idea. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, let's talk about pending B Corps. So this is specific to companies that have been in business less than 12 months. So early stage companies like startups, B Corp has made this pending B Corp option available to them. So to become a pending B Corp, you just have to pay a $500 fee, and then you have to meet the legal requirement. So you do have to make that change to a benefit corporation. You fill out the impact assessment, but it's with your best estimates. So you're going through and basically talking about, with the limited information that you have as a company that's only been in business 12 months, fill out that information. You sign the pending B Corp agreement. And then a year after you've done that, you do have to do the full B Corp certification with that documentation and with all of that information. But most companies, after going through it and getting above 80 points on the first pass, are in a good place when they then have to go back and certify as a true B Corp once the pending status is over. So next slide, please.
Great. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat again.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of B Corp status. The pros and cons are really kind of business specific. Like we talked about earlier, a lot of companies get B Corp because it will help with hiring, or if you're in a service-based business that wants to work exclusively with other B Corps, it's obviously a big pro and benefit for you to become B Corp certified. Some of the cons, I think, that can be either prohibitive or just barriers for some companies, the legal change. You do have to become a benefit corporation. That can turn some companies off. And it is a significant time and effort. B Corp is the way that it is for a reason, and companies that have gone through the assessment and have met that standard have there's a pretty high barrier, but it also means that once you've completed it, you're in this sort of specialized crowd. So it takes a lot of time and effort, but ultimately the benefits like hiring, you're in a community of other B Corps, those kind of benefits I think tend to outweigh the cons for a lot of companies. I don't think, the question I get sometimes is, are there different industries that it's suited for, those types of things. I think the main thing for any business to consider is that it's a true reflection on your culture, and you're certifying that you're doing business in a certain way, that you are legally saying we are going to incorporate people, planet, and profit. So if that makes you a little nervous, or you're sort of like, I don't know, maybe that isn't for us, that I think is more of an indicator instead of like an industry. But now, I mean, B Corp is in so many industries, product, service. So I think those are just some things to kind of keep in mind if you're kind of weighing the pros and cons. So these are just some examples of current pending B Corps. Over 100 companies now have listed as a current pending B Corp. So another example that I like to give, I have a colleague that runs a marketing and design studio, and she works exclusively with B Corps. So she wanted to become a B Corp herself in order to kind of set that standard. So from a B2B perspective, just for that idea. If you go on to the B Lab website, it will give a list of all the pending B Corps too. So if you're thinking about it and you're in a place of, is anybody else in our industry doing this? What is kind of the landscape for the world that we're living in? If you go and look at both pending B Corps and full B Corps, that will help kind of give you an idea of what other people in your industry are doing as well. So next slide. Great, thank you. Yeah, so like Courtney mentioned earlier, you can also use the impact assessment for free. It's free to use, and you can use it as a tool apart from getting certified. So I know a lot of startups, obviously you have a million things going on. It can be kind of overwhelming to then say, oh my gosh, we need to become B Corp certified. But if you want to start building different ESG sustainability practices into your business, the tool is a great way to do that because it's free to start and to use. So I recommend that companies, if you don't think that you can get to 80 points, you can set your own points goal. You can say, we want to get to 50 points this year, or we want to hit a certain number of points within the environment section. And then, if you're at 50 points this year, maybe you're at 60 points by next year. So even if you are sitting and you're thinking that B Corp seems really overwhelming, the BIA is a great tool to use apart from getting certified if you're in this kind of mindset of how can we be incorporating different ESG factors into our business. So let's go. Okay, great. So this is some other common questions I get. So we already talked about how long will it take. It's the other thing that I'll say about that is it's pretty comprehensive. It's definitely not something that is sort of a one and done thing. If you're going to go for the whole 80 points, a lot of companies can spend time, gathering different data points. And so as much as you're kind of going through having all that documentation behind the scenes, that can also take some time to upload those things and check that. And you have to kind of do different team members. So the other thing to think about if you are a pending B Corp or you've been in business more than 12 months and you're thinking about becoming a full B Corp and B Lab right now, they're working with about a 5 to 8 month queue of applicants. So to get to the point from submission to even meeting with an analyst is about 5 to 8 months. So that's just something else to keep in mind from kind of a time perspective. I talked to some companies that, set a goal of being certified in 6 months, 12 months. It's just important to check B Lab's queue and make sure that those things are on track if you're setting goals in that way. The other question that comes up a lot is a company will say, I don't do fill in the blank. Is that okay? I don't have a big environmental thing. You know, we have a virtual office. We don't have a lot of benefits, activities. I think for the most part, that's fine. I recommend that companies lean into areas that they do have, strengths that they have. If you are really strong in different environmental options, then lean into that. But because the impact assessment is different by industry, your questions are going to be based on your industry. So a service-based business is not going to have as many environmental manufacturing questions as maybe a product company will. So then the other question, how much does it cost? So B Lab does have a list of pricing on their website. I'll share some of those things in the chat. And then pricing is based on revenue. So now you do have to pay a fee to submit. That's a change that B Corp has made in the past 6 months, but it starts at, I think, $1,000 annually if your revenue is under 150,000, and then it goes up from there. So next slide, please. Thanks, Courtney. Okay, so let's talk just some kind of tips and tricks if you are in the assessment. I think it's important to keep in mind that B Corp is transparent and also private. So I say that because the assessment is very transparent. You can see how many questions each point is, how many points each question is worth. You can kind of play around and say, if we answered this, what would it be? But it's private because unless you tell me that you're completing the impact assessment, I won't know. It's between you and B Corp. So if you just want to start the assessment and test it, nobody's going to know. So, you know, feel free to use it. The other thing that it's important to keep in mind is that B Lab wants to help. B Lab is very interested in having as many companies certify as possible. So there's different FAQs when you're in the assessment. They have a knowledge base. You can set up a call with them to talk through your assessment. So I would really use B Lab if you're interested in going through the assessment. Don't be afraid to reach out to them over email or set up a time to call with them. And this is a little bit similar to what I said on the previous slide, but it's important to use your existing structure and company. If your employee benefits and engagement are really strong, use that and then build from there. So, you know, you can use your team to help through the assessment, use it as a goal setting tool. So I think the culture that you've already set up for yourself and for your business can be really helpful as you're going through the assessment. The other thing to keep in mind is that time is on your side. There's no time requirement for this. That's good and bad because once you start, you're not held to any sort of time thing, but you can take your time and go at your own pace. So anybody can start the assessment. So I recommend that you at least go check it out and kind of see if this is something that you might be interested in.
Yeah, and Eliza, when you're working with clients, do you recommend that one person on the team start this, or have you had cases where multiple people on a team are working on it together? Do you prefer one or the other?
I've seen both. I think it depends on how big your team is. But I know that some, especially smaller companies, like there's going to be an HR person that probably has all those policies and knows where all those documents are. So you can have multiple people fill it out. I think it is helpful to have kind of a point person, at least someone that's sort of like, okay, keeping us on track and this is who we need to get. But I think it can also be effective if you have multiple people
Okay.
do it.
So this doesn't need to be somebody with like a deep understanding of sustainability necessarily.
No. And as you're going through the assessment, when you're on a question and you are thinking, what does a living wage mean? What does local mean? There's a little learn more button on each question, and that will go and will give examples and will explain why it's asking what it is. So they've set it up in a way that you don't have to have a big background in ESG or sustainability or any of the other kind of B Corp topics. Okay, so how do you get certified? What's kind of the best way to go about this? I'm going to share some website resources in the chat. B Lab's website is very robust. They have different policy templates. There's resources on their website. So if you want to do it yourself, there are enough resources, I think, to do it yourself. The main reason that I see people come to get a consultant is that it's just very time consuming. And especially, if you're in a startup mode, time is of the essence. So it's just nice to be able to pay someone to do it, but it is accessible to people that want to do it themselves. People have been doing it themselves for a long time. So it's really just figuring out if you want to spend the money on a consultant. Most clients that I work with have tried and 6 months passes and they haven't touched it, and it's just competing priorities and they want to get it done and basically have an accountability partner, a project manager, and somebody that they can go through and say, is this my impact model? I met with a client last week that was just confused about the different kind of impact model and some of the questions, and they missed out on 20 points just from making those kinds of things. So if you're looking at it and you're getting frustrated, it can be helpful to have kind of an expert review it, but it definitely is accessible for yourself. So that's, yeah, I mean, if you are interested in help, if you want to talk, please go to my website. I do a strategy session model with B Corp clients. It's probably the most popular, and that's 90 minutes. We talk through the assessment, we go through it. I have policy templates for you to use. It's really just that kind of accountability check. And then if you're a bigger company or want help over the long term, I also do, ongoing help. And then I do half day and day long sessions too, if you want someone to start, if you just want to start with someone and kind of go through it that way. So I'm happy to talk about that if you want to. But I think that's the last, and we can open it up for questions. I will put these in the chat. These are those things I was talking about with the legal requirements, the certification process on the website, and then what I was talking about with pending B Corps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eliza. That was great. As mentioned twice already, this recording will be available. Typically, it makes it to YouTube first. So if you wanted to share with your teams or with anybody else, feel free to find it there first. And then we'll just hang out here for the next 2 to 3 minutes. And anybody who has follow-up questions, feel free to submit them in the chat for Eliza. But thank you, Eliza. And again, her website is greenbuoyconsulting.com.
Yes.
So I've been on your website. And you have, there were 2 things I was really interested in. One, you said, strategies to help clients avoid greenwashing, which I think is really key. It becomes very transparent. And I think, when that is happening, and I think that can be difficult for early stage companies as well, as they're just starting to see the fabric of their ESG and their impact, and
yeah.
constantly changing. So I would love to hear your thoughts just on sort of tips, practices that you employ to help clients avoid greenwashing or being perceived that way. And also just the communication piece that we talked about. Just anecdotally, how are your clients communicating with investors, suppliers, customers, employees that this is an effort?
Yeah, so I think the first sort of main way to avoid greenwashing, and this is basic, but you'll be surprised about how many people don't adhere to this, is don't talk about anything that you're not doing. So if it's if you look at this and you're kind of thinking, oh, if we just kind of fudge this or said this, don't do that. I think there's been a shift in the past probably 2 or 3 years where companies used to be afraid to not be disclosing enough. It was always like, well, we can be doing more and we can be doing more. And now there's been a shift into companies feeling comfortable saying, we're 6 months into this. We're new. We're still learning. We're trying to figure that out. And instead of hiding that, they're putting that on their website and talking about either even just saying, we're starting to look at waste, we're starting to look at energy, and 2 paragraphs about what that looks like and what your plans are, I think go a long way in avoiding sort of this perception of greenwashing. And as I think companies have become more transparent and with social media and different things, it's much, I think there's a new comfort in kind of being honest. And so I recommend that clients take that approach if they're, if they're at the early stages. And then the other thing, I think it gets a little bit tricky because I think it's also, it's kind of a non-negotiable now. So if you're not saying something, how is that perceived? So being able to just kind of keep something at baseline. But I think from a communications perspective, there's so many different stakeholders and so many different things at play. You're talking to investors, you're talking to suppliers, you're talking to customers, you're talking to employees. So I think making sure that you're communicating the same message across all of those things. So, and if that's really basic, then that's fine. But I think there's something, because of that transparency, it's important to have a cohesive message as you're talking across those different groups.
Great, thanks. And one last question, if nobody else has anything for the chat. Is it ever too early as a business, if you've passed that 12-month mark, do you think it's ever too early to start the assessment?
I've talked to some companies that have said that it was too early because they didn't have enough information. If you don't have an employee handbook, if it's just 2 co-founders, I think it can benefit some companies to wait until you've hired someone. But you can also use the B Corp, there's an employee handbook template that B Corp recommends. And as you're kind of going through and looking at it, to build your business to that standard. But so much of that is really business specific. So I think the question to ask of, is it too early, is there something else that is going to take priority in our business, whether that's raising money, whether that's hiring someone, and then we can get into B Corp, or do we feel like we have enough to share and enough to kind of build on to do it?
Great. And one more quick one. Do you have a sense, this might be hard to tell because I'm sure the numbers are always changing, but do you have a sense of how big the B Corp universe is today? How many companies have been certified, and the geographies?
I think it's about 3,200 globally. But so I think it's that. And then I saw a statistic where it's like 200,000 companies have used the assessment or started it. So there are a lot of companies that are just using it because it's a great tool and are using it to not get certified. The other thing that I've heard from B Corp is I think it's about a 40% rate from companies that apply, go through the verification, and end up getting certified. So B Corp is trying to make it really clear to companies, that you do have to make the legal change, that this is something that is pretty robust, and that you do have to have enough documentation. But I mean, pre-COVID, that 5 to 8 month queue didn't exist. It was like 6 weeks. So I think that really speaks to how popular it's gotten, the number of companies that are certifying. And a lot of those companies are newer, younger companies. I mean, the fact that this pending B Corp model now exists, I think it's exciting to see companies that are building their business to the standard or using it to develop different ESG processes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Eliza.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful being here with you,
Yes,
and really excited about your work.
thank
And
you.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.